Hey, what is up, Rock Nation? Woo! I'm telling you, man. Welcome back to another episode of the Rock Right of Center podcast with your boys at Real Mike Bell and my buddy over there,
Ryan Gass. Sometimes when you say that, I feel like we're on a rock station. 99.7 The Rock.
Ooh.
The Rock.
Bro, I'm telling you, man, if I could have been born a decade earlier or 20 years earlier, I probably would have been on the radio, man. I'm telling you, you're listening to The Rock.
The Rock.
With your boys. Oh!
Oh my gosh.
The Rock. Hey, welcome back, guys. Today is just going to be kind of an around the room, man. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about, and this one really isn't targeted to one thing individually, but one of the things we want to talk about today, guys, is the website. You've been hearing a lot about that, guys. Listen, head on over to rockpodcastnation.com, hit the subscribe button first thing, put your info in there. We're not going to sell that shit. It just helps us kind of get pushed up to the top of the charts. Also, while you're there, if you're interested in helping us get the message out, if you're interested in becoming a supporter of the show, just go over to the Pledge Your Support tab. You'll see all the options there. It's not crazy, guys. You know, we're not trying to get rich off you. What we are trying to do is be able to expand our reach. And part of that means getting more airtime, getting advertisements out there in front of people, getting our name in the paper, all this other stuff, guys. And you know, hey, we're fine just doing two shows a week, but if we want to grow this beast, it's going to take a little bit more than that. So with that being said, guys, rockpodcastnation.com, head over there and don't be a taker. Let's get this thing going. Anyways, now time to get into it. So like I said, you are listening to The Rock with at Real Mike Bell and at Ryan R. Gass. And in a previous episode, guys, we talked extensively about social media censoring and, you know, Section 230 and what that means and all this other stuff. And there's really so much to it. But Ryan was sharing some stories about how he's been shadow banned and how his several Facebook pages have been shadow banned. You know, and we talked extensively about Facebook's activities when it comes to particular messages. And Ryan was kind of clowning, saying, oh, you know, he said something. He's like, you know what, Mike? He's like, I'm sad that it happened to you, but I'm kind of happy to see it happening to somebody else. That way no one thinks he's a cook job. And it's true, guys. I was censored by social media. I was censored by Facebook. And the links I had to go through, the hoops I had to jump through to get back on and to be able to share stuff and then to be able to promote my shows, this one and the Pod So Hardcast, and just to set up a public figure page, all of that shit, man. You got to jump through hoops. And I got something in the mail today, Ryan. Yeah. And yes, this was from Facebook at One Hacker Way, Menlo Park, California, 94025-1456. To yours truly. Okay. Now, why did I get this piece of paper in the mail, Ryan? Do you know?
To try to verify that you ain't Russian.
It's trying to verify that I'm not Russian. Now, what's interesting is in order to talk about social issues is what Facebook's calling it now. In order to talk about COVID or elections or politics or even parenting, to talk about social issues and run advertisements on your page, you have to be verified. That's kind of a good thing, right? Like you would hope that the people that are out there pushing their agenda should be verified. Okay, well, I mean, I guess there's a step in the box there where I guess I could be corrupted or I could be an operative or whatever. That's neither here nor there, guys. But I had to submit copies front and back of my driver's license. I had to set up dual authentication, right? So every time I log into Facebook, I get a text message. And I had to verify my address that was listed on my driver's license. And in order to do that, I had to put my address in there. They sent me a paper mail, no email. They sent me a paper with a 6-digit code on there that I had a very short amount of time to add that code back into the Facebook system, the ID verification system, in order to be approved to kind of run my pages. Guys, I subscribe to some newspapers from back in Arizona. Okay. And because that's where I grew up, I'm very interested in the news there. And I've also found that the news that they put out in those newspapers is not biased. And they have really good opinion sections that I obviously get a lot of inspiration from. I received, on the same day that I received this paper from Facebook, Ryan, I also received 3 newspapers. 3 newspapers stuck together, and the oldest one was January 23rd. So here it is, March, and I'm receiving newspapers from the 23rd of January. What am I getting at? What I'm getting at here is this. Had Facebook's paper been stuck wherever the hell my newspaper was stuck at for 2 months, I would have never gotten this sheet. I would have never got the 6-digit code. And if I hadn't got this information back into Facebook before 2 weeks from now, I would have been permanently disabled.
I believe it.
And guys, that is crazy, but fortunately I was able to get that. But what this speaks to, Ryan, is this, and this is kind of what I want to hope to get into during this episode, Rock Nation. ID. Okay. Facebook makes sure before I can really say or boost or do anything on their platform that I verify my ID. Now, if a company like Facebook, who really is just interested in grabbing my ad dollars, right? If they take deliberate actions to get a ID, why can't we do that as a country? You know, why can't we have voter ID? I mean, guys, it's 2021. Like, why haven't we figured this out yet?
I have to show an ID every time I go to buy a gun. That's a Second Amendment protected right that I have. Mm-hmm. But I don't have to show ID. Nobody has to show ID to vote. Anybody and their mother can go vote.
That's true.
You know, I actually went to school with a guy, Patrick Moran, and he got actually caught up in a voting scandal. His dad was a former member of the Congress for many, many years, and I believe he more or less worked for his dad. And he got caught in a voting fraud scandal. I want to say it's been a little while now. I want to say it was 2014, maybe. And, you know, y'all can go out there and look at it. It was a Project Veritas that got it. And it's all on video, too. It's not like, you know, some like trumped up emails and stuff. Like, they got them on video and stuff. And that's one of those things they just got swept underneath the rug. And, you know, and nobody, for some reason, cares to make sure that every vote that is being counted is actually a valid vote. You know, there are many instances, right? What I'm not going to put an exact number on, but nobody disputes the fact that there have been many instances where dead people have been dead for days, weeks, months, years, have been documented as voting in elections. How is that still happening? How are they still on the voter rolls? How can we not purge our voter rolls to have that? You know, there are also many instances where people have voted in multiple states. They move from one state to the other, and they vote in both. You know, how does that still happen? Why?
I don't have that answer, but I think that if there were a group of smart people that were paid for 3 to 6 months full time, they could figure it out. You know, like
they can track people with their phones about where they go and stuff as it relates to COVID, the whole COVID tracking thing.
I mean, it's not that hard.
But they can't do anything when it comes to this?
It doesn't seem like it should be this hard. You know, we were just talking with a buddy of ours, and we were talking about, you know, how quickly things can change and stuff. And there are rooms of people out there that are brilliant PhD minds that if you put them to a task, they could come up with the solution pretty damn quickly. You know, it's part of what has made us the leaders of innovation and technology for decades in this country. Yet we still can't fix fucking voter ID.
And one of the arguments they say out there is, oh, voter ID laws are racist. Well, you tell me, right? If you believe that, you tell me which particular races you don't think are competent enough to get an ID. Because if you say it's racist, that it's targeting a certain race, and you're telling me that there are particular races that are not capable, who for different reasons can't afford or don't know how to make it to the DMV or wherever to get a proper ID. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that there's any particular race that's not that competent, that doesn't have the financial means to be able to do so. again, that saying that it's a racist thing or that it's targeting the poor, we give every week, month, year, we give away hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars so people can go out and use that to buy food or do this or that. But, it's okay. Well, let's just say that you're saying that it's targeting the poor. Okay, well, why don't we give a free ID, which maybe costs, say, $10 and stuff.
We should do it for free.
And I say free. Nothing's free in life, all right? But if we're going to give away, all this other shit, and I think that's money well spent. I would rather have some of my tax dollars be put out to make sure that people have an ID so that they can go and vote, and we can make sure that we have a proper and safe and protected election. I think that's proper. That is a well spending of my tax dollars.
Where this racist stuff comes from, Ryan. Again, and guys, we just did a whole episode on race. If you haven't listened to that one yet, I encourage you to go back and grab it. But all right, so after the Civil War, whenever the people of color in this country and specifically black people were kind of given the right to vote, one of the problems with it, and this is where the whole voting and the racist stuff kind of started. So way back in the day, if you're in the South in the Jim Crow laws, if you were black and you wanted to vote, you had to have proof of employment. And the only way to get proof of employment at that time was to go back to who was employing you. And that was your previous slave owner, right? Or you had to be able to write your name to vote. And a lot of black people and frankly, a lot of white people couldn't write their name, right? We've all seen it in the stories and like in the cartoons, right? They would just put an X for their name, and it all kind of started back then. And what's crazy is like the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, we've all heard of the ACLU, right? They've been pushing for years for equity among, and inclusion and diversity and all this other shit, man, that, should be common sense by now. But they're the ones who are still claiming that, it's racist to make people show their ID when they vote. Well, okay. I don't think so. I think that that's just one of those terms. They're like, it's somebody screaming fire in a movie theater.
Well, if that's the case, I'm going to cut you off. If that's the case, why isn't it racist to require someone to show their ID to buy a gun? What you think that black people are not safe to have a firearm and stuff? They have to show an ID. Like you can't have your cake and eat it too.
No, and why isn't it racist to make people show an ID to fly? Yeah, or why is it racist to make people show an ID to buy alcohol?
Exactly.
If you're 21 years old and you got to go in there and buy yourself some booze, you're fucking going to get a driver's license or an ID to do that, aren't you?
Yeah, don't be racist or ageist.
Yeah.
Why are you going to tell a Muslim man that he has to show you his ID to get on a plane? Why you got to show? Why does a black man have to show you his ID in order to vote or buy a gun?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, exactly, man. And it's fucking crazy, guys. And this whole concept of voter ID, it's not new. People have been, as Ryan was just mentioning, people have been talking about it for years. It's always been, it seems to be the simplest fucking thing possible. Mm-hmm. I have to, out here in Maryland, like we have to get the real ID. And I'm sure across the country, y'all have to do that too. So we have a common identification card.
I never understood that.
I don't understand it either, man. What's funny is I came from Arizona, and out in Arizona, when you got your driver's license, it didn't expire for 50 years or 40 years, 40 or 50 years. So I can get a driver's license at 16 and not have to go back and get another one until I was, in my 50s.
Wow.
Right. Sure. My face is going to change along the way. I'm probably going to move at least once and we'll need to update my ID to show my new, my new address or whatever. But again, it's to drive a car, you have to have an ID. To buy a gun, you have to have an ID. To buy booze, you have to have an ID. To buy lottery tickets, cigarettes, whatever the fuck it is, you have to have an ID. Why don't you have to have an ID to partake in one of the most important things in this fucking country, which is to elect the people that represent us? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Something actually, this is kind of a random whatever. Here in Maryland where we are, we have a lot of Amish people, and I have always kind of wondered. I never really took the time to ask them, and I think I'm going to, because Amish, if you're not familiar with Amish, that they don't. I apologize. I'm not trying to offend people by my ignorance, but they don't. Their religion, more or less, and their culture doesn't allow them to be photographed, right? And how do you show a picture ID to go buy a gun if you can't? If it goes against your religion to have a photo ID?
Yeah.
Now, I'm actually curious, and I'm gonna probably try to ask them. I go down to the Amish for different things, including not limited to picking up feed for my chickens and my rabbits and stuff. So next time I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna stop. I'm like, hey, have you ever bought a farm? What was the process like for you?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah, and a lot of guys, if you're listening to this from out west or stuff like that, we out here in Maryland and Pennsylvania and kind of the northeastern region, we have a lot of the Amish and the Mennonite community out here, and they're it's just a different type of people. They stay humble. They don't use rubber tires, and
Mennonites are a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah, Mennonites are a little more relaxed, but I mean, you could find a YouTube video that'll tell you all about them. But voter ID, man, it's not that hard. Your boy here, if I want to run ads on Facebook or anything, I have to validate my ID. If I want to get on an airplane, I have to show my ID. If I want to go to Mexico, I have to show my ID. Not only but my kids have to show an ID.
Yeah. If you want to post on Facebook talking about and calling for the requirement of voter ID, they disagree with that, but they say, hey, you have to have an ID and present it to us in order to talk on that topic.
It's fucking God. Yeah, if I want to run an ad on Facebook to you, Rock Nation, and say, hey guys, maybe you should write your senator about voter ID. Before I could run that ad, because it's a political topic, I have to show Facebook my ID. Isn't this some backwoods shit?
Just like they're the same people that run Facebook and the same people that work there and stuff, they want more gun control. But when I advertise for classes that are results of gun control, they say, no, we demanded that you have to have these classes and stuff, but hey, yeah, you're teaching them, you can't advertise for them on our platform. It's so if it weren't for double standards, they'd have no standards at all.
Yeah, what they say, man. All right, speaking of voter ID, right? Like, everyone says, if you oppose voter ID, Russia thanks you. And it's true.
Yeah.
If you're against voter ID, and we've talked about it on previous episodes, there are these think tanks of people in Russia, in China, in North Korea, and all of our near-peer adversary countries around the globe that are looking to influence the results of our everyday lives, not just our election, Rock Nation. Like, they want to inspire us to buy a certain clothing brand or buy a certain beverage or buy anything, right? They are aligned, and they are smart, and they have rooms full of people that do nothing but think about ways to influence us. Part of that is to influence us in our elections, right? And they could say all they want, but if you can't walk up to the voting line and show an ID, like if you don't have to do that, or if you do have to prove your ID, well, Russia's not going to be very happy. It's just crazy, man. It's just crazy. And most people in the United States agree, Ryan, that we should have, voter IDs and stuff like that. And this whole term, voter suppression, right? It's designed to confuse people by conflating perfectly legal activities, such as, keeping voter rolls current with, it's just ridiculous, man. And it's shit that they're pulling back from the Jim Crow era laws and trying to stay as still relevant.
If you are a liberal, or it doesn't matter what your background, but if you disagree with voter ID, if you think that there should be no voter ID, that there should be no checks and balances, I want you to get in contact with us. I want to hear your argument. What is it? Is it racist, and why? Why is it racist? Why is it whatever? And how can we not address that? I'd like to hear from you. I really would.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is
genuinely
something.
I want to have an intellectual discussion. I want to talk down to you and fucking shit on you. Although
you gotta have to have some pretty convincing proof, man, because I cannot, and I consider myself, Ryan, to be a pretty smart person, but also pretty open-minded, right? I've probably proven that to many of you on my stances on, masks and just everything, $15 minimum wage. I mean, I'm an open-minded person. If you come to me with a well-rounded argument supported by facts, I'm likely to at least hear you out, right? But you better come armed, and with knowledge, that is. You gotta specify that. You do. You got to say it, and it's fucking crazy, man, what this world's come to. But if you really think that we should not have to ID ourselves in order to vote, why? I need to know that.
I'm very curious, honestly. I would love to hear a an argument, a solid argument and stuff. Like I can tell people sometimes in my classes about firearms and stuff and laws. There are times when I'll disagree with 99%, if not 100% of gun control, but I can understand where it came from. I can understand the idea behind it. I can understand the objective that they had in trying to do that, even though it's misguided often and it's baseless and it actually is not fruitful. I can understand sometimes where they their point of view, and I want to try to, even if I disagree, I want to try to understand the point of views of those who say no to voter ID, to no to secure elections. I want to hear it. I want to try to understand it, even if I disagree.
Let me ask you a question, Ryan. Do you think that somebody should have to show an ID to buy a gun?
Honestly,
don't you fucking say no, buddy.
Why not?
Seriously, you don't think that I should have to show an ID to buy a firearm?
Why should I?
Oh, that's a good question. Why do you think I shouldn't?
Let's put this way.
Now, you say I shouldn't. Why should I not?
What is the purpose of an ID in that transaction?
So, a lack of an argument against is not an argument for. Okay, so I'm not trying to trap you into saying that we need one, but if you can't tell me a reason why we shouldn't,
there is no practical purpose for it.
All right, so if I'm a pederast and I am well known in the community for raping little kids and I am a convicted felon and the only way for anyone to ID me is to run my driver's license number or whatever through a system to ensure that I'm not going to procure a firearm that can then be used to hold a child, against their will by threat of death to be able to inflict my will upon them.
So you see me can't do a background check without a photo ID?
I could just make all that shit up. We can't vote. I can
make a fraudulent ID too, right?
Okay, so now I need a fraudulent ID. I could vote,
and not only that too.
No, you're spinning it around. So I can make a fraudulent ID and go vote.
Oh yeah,
and and if I don't need an ID at all, and all I have to do is like write some shit on paper. Mm-hmm. So you got to give me more, buddy. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say we don't need an ID to vote and then say, or you can't say, oh, you don't need an ID to buy a gun. I could verify your ID other ways, then say I need to have one to go vote. So let's hear it.
And that's fair. So like what I say is this. If we're going to be required to have an ID to buy a gun, then why not for fucking voting? Hey, if you're not going to do it for voting, then okay, I got you. Concede the other side too, though. You can't have it both ways. So let's have it one way or the other. Not, I'm not saying it has to be split down the middle. I'm talking about one way or the other. No fucking ID to buy a gun or voting. Or fucking ID for both. It's got to be one way or the other. Again, like you said, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I don't. I want it to be one way or the other. Equal. I don't want, why should gun owners be discriminated against, but, the American voter can't? Seriously.
You know what? That is one way to look at it.
And I'm sorry, I should be clear. Not the American voter, but voters. You should have to be the American voter, not a voter from anywhere else and stuff. You should have to be a voter, American voter, and if it's talking about state elections, voters from that jurisdiction.
Sure.
So you should be discriminated against. If you're not American, if you're not from that jurisdiction, if you're not from that district, you shouldn't be able to vote there. So to a certain extent, yes, you should be discriminated against when it comes to that.
That's not even discrimination. You know what I'm saying? That's
honestly,
that's
it is
classification.
You discriminate on them based on their residency.
So you could squint your eyes. It's
not a bad discrimination. It's not a negative. It's not like I'm a horrible person for discriminating in that way. Just like if I'm not a proponent for gun control, but if I were to own a gun shop, I wouldn't allow a 3-year-old to walk into my gun shop and buy a gun. So I would discriminate against them.
Not necessarily discrimination, but the semantics of the word choice isn't really what's important here, right?
Like negative connotation.
It's I think two things. Well, all right. I support the Second Amendment right to own and bear firearms without suppression, right? And what I mean by suppression is I don't think that right should be suppressed. But at the same time, I think that we need to do a fair job of ensuring that we are not allowing those worst among us to acquire firearms.
And I will say this actually too, on that same topic, and we're about to go down a big gun control.
Let's save it. We'll get into gun control in another episode. Voter ID.
We're doing it next.
Voter ID.
We're not leaving here tonight until we go over this.
Hey, you got it, man. Voter ID. So you need a real ID now, or else you can't fly. You need an ID to fly. You need an ID to cross the border. You need an ID to buy guns. You need an ID to buy tobacco. You need an ID to buy whiskey. You need a fucking ID to watch an NC or a 17 or older, rated movie at the movie theater, right? You need an ID to get into a club. You need an ID to get into a bar. You need an ID everywhere, Ryan. But guess where you don't need an ID at?
To go vote.
The fucking voting line. And what a lot of people will tell you, man, the data's pretty clear. So, what they say is there's like this disenfranchisement due to voter ID, right? But the reports tell us something different. For instance, claims, for example, that Wisconsin's voter ID law took 200,000 votes from Hillary Clinton. Do you remember hearing about that? No, you do.
Mm-hmm.
They have been repeatedly debunked, right? Asking for voter ID, asking for somebody to identify themselves before they vote does not still a vote. And if we did a better job of saying like, hey guys, before you come vote, you better go get an ID, then this wouldn't even be a topic of discussion. And the National Bureau of Economic Research even published a report on this very thing in 2019. Now, you said something earlier. You said that some people claim that voter ID discriminates the poor and other people, right?
Yeah.
The disenfranchised among us, right? So here's a novel idea. How about we give free IDs? Why not? Mm-hmm. You got states like Maryland who tax the shit out of us, bro. Over here? We got to get a new ID. Was that every 4 years, every 3 years or something? I'm new over here. I've only had to get one once. And then I had to go back and get a real ID that costed me $50 to get, there are people, Ryan, that cannot afford $50 to get an ID. Like, I get that. There were times in my life, I've mentioned on here where I have to, 27 minutes in, my freaking voice is starting to rattle a bit. There have been times in my life, like whenever I was working fast food, that $50 was make it or break it for me. I couldn't afford to take $50 and go and buy an ID card. Mm-hmm. So if we are to do mandated, again, this is like wearing a mask. Mm-hmm. If it's something that's mandated of me, mm-hmm. then it should be provided by the government. So if I am mandated to show an ID, then we should have an ID. Mm-hmm. Common sense, right?
Yeah.
What do you guys think? We want to hear in the comments. Head on over to, Rock Podcast Nation on Facebook, on Twitter, I think Ryan might have given up on the MeWe. I'm not sure.
I haven't been given the attention that I should.
Head over to Rock Podcast Nation at Rock Podcast Nation on Facebook and Instagram and let us know. What do you guys think about voter ID? If you are against voter ID, let us know why.
If you want to hear a great discussion on gun control and why I think that anybody that's not actively incarcerated should be able to buy a gun, go ahead and make sure you subscribe to our
podcast.
Make sure you go and subscribe to our podcast. We're about to fucking get into it. I am fucking heated. I am ready, and I'm about to blow his fucking mind. And I'm not just doing this for whatever. Like I thoroughly actually believe this, and I'll stand by this shit. And you're about to fucking hear why on the fucking next podcast.
Hey guys, if you want to hear more about all of this stuff that Ryan's talking about, Ryan, I think we need to put this on the exclusive stuff. This is for our founding members and for our Rock supporters. All right, so if you want to hear more about what Ryan has to say about all of this, head over to the podcast page, the website, rockpodcastnation.com, and pledge your support, and that'll instantly gain you access to all the stuff Ryan's talking about. And with that, Rock Nation, we are out.
Stay strapped to get clapped, especially on this next episode.